Welcome to Fear Spiral, your gateway to the darkest and most chilling encounters from the coldest, most isolated corners of the world. Tonight, we're diving deep into 10 true-style horror stories, frozen highways, vanished rest stops, and the terrifying things that stalk the night in Alaska. Each story is told from the first-person perspective as if the person lived it, and every mile you travel with us will make your heartbeat race a little faster. From the figure standing by a mile marker to the rest stop that vanished into the snow, these stories are designed to immerse you in fear. The cold, the isolation, the eerie silence. The unknown. You'll feel the frostbite, hear the crunch of snow underfoot, and see shadows that seem just a little too close. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a descent into the spiral of terror. Also, comment below and tell us, what time of night are you watching this? There's nothing like a chilling story at the perfect hour to make it hit just right. Now buckle up and drive carefully. The highway is dark, the snow is thick, and Fear Spiral is about to take you on a journey you won't forget. The figure by the mile marker. I've been a trucker most of my adult life, running long hauls across Alaska and parts of northern Canada. I've seen my fair share of strange things out on those icy roads. Weird lights, vanishing taillights, even animals that didn't look quite right under the beam of high beams at 2 in the morning. But there's one night that's never left me, no matter how many miles I've driven since. It was November 2019, right around 2:30 a.m. somewhere between Fairbanks and Anchorage on the Parks Highway. The temperature that night was brutal, 20 degree Fahrenheit according to the digital display on my dash. I was hauling a medical supply load bound for a small Anchorage clinic, just trying to make it through before the next blizzard rolled in. If you've never driven that route, let me tell you, it's a different kind of quiet out there. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels alive somehow. The snow absorbs every sound except your own engine, so you start to hear your heartbeat, your breathing, and sometimes sounds that don't belong to you. That night, the only thing on my mind was keeping the rig steady. The road was a slick, glassy sheet of black ice, and the snow drifts on either side looked deep enough to swallow a semi. My headlights cut through a white blur, snowflakes streaking like static. The heater was fighting a losing battle against the cold, and I kept glancing at the clock just to keep my mind occupied. At around mile 160, I noticed something strange. A flicker up ahead off to the right side of the highway. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe ice on a road sign. But as I got closer, the shape solidified into something that made my stomach tighten. It was a person standing by the road. I eased off the gas. I've seen plenty of stranded motorists out there, and I've helped a few too. But something about this one didn't sit right. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, half turned toward the trees. The closer I got, the more details came into view. The figure was tall, thin, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, completely unsuited for that temperature. His clothes looked dry, which didn't make sense. The snow was coming down in sheets. Anyone standing out there would have been coated white. I flipped on my high beams and slowed the rig to about 20. My cab lights illuminated the mile marker sign beside him, 167. That made me pause because I knew this stretched like the back of my hand. There wasn't supposed to be a 167 here. The last one I'd passed was 162, and the next wouldn't show up until near Nanana. Still, I rolled my window down a few inches and shouted, "Hey, you okay out there?" The man didn't respond. Didn't even look at me. The wind howled through the gap in the window, biting my face. "You need a ride?" I tried again. Nothing. That's when he turned on slow, deliberate and looked straight into my headlights. His face was pale, almost bluish in the harsh light. Eyes wide, unblinking. His expression wasn't angry or scared, just empty. Like he was looking through me, not at me. Every instinct I had screamed, "Don't stop." I gripped the wheel, my heart thudding so hard it felt like it shook my chest. I should have just driven off right then, but something about the whole thing and the cold, the stillness in it pinned me there like I was part of the ice myself. Then my CB radio crackled. It was just static at first, the usual hiss and pop from interference. But then a voice cut through. Faint, male, calm, "Keep driving." I froze. I hadn't touched the mic. The CB was on, but I wasn't tuned to any local channel. Out there you could go hours without hearing anyone. "Who is this?" I said, eyes still on the figure, no answer. Just another burst of static, then silence. When I looked back toward the road, the man was gone. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shoulder was empty, no footprints, no motion, nothing. The snow was undisturbed, the mile marker barely visible through the gusts. My breathing picked up. My palms were slick with sweat despite the freezing air. I slammed the truck into gear and pushed the pedal down hard. The tires squealed slightly as they hit a patch of ice, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. For the next 15 miles, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone behind me, maybe even running along the shoulder. But there was nothing, only darkness and swirling white. By the time I reached the Nanana rest stop, my nerves were shot. I parked, killed the engine, and just sat there for a while, hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't stop glancing at my side mirrors, half expecting that pale face to appear. After a few minutes, I grabbed my thermos and poured some lukewarm coffee into the lid. My hands were trembling so badly I spilled half of it on my lap. The heat from the liquid should have felt good. Instead, it just made the cold inside me worse. I pulled out my GPS to check where I'd stopped. That's when I noticed something that made me feel sick. The route tracker, and the one that logs every few miles automatically, had frozen. The last recorded location was mile marker 167. But when I tried zooming in on the map, the section between 165 and 170 showed nothing but blank terrain. No road data. No coordinates. Just an empty gap, like that stretch of highway didn't exist. I reset the GPS. Still blank. It took me nearly 20 minutes to convince myself it was just a malfunction. Maybe the cold was messing with the hardware, but even telling myself that didn't help much. I finally started the engine again and pushed on toward Anchorage. The snow eased up around dawn, and I made it to the clinic without incident. Still, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. That face, the voice, the vanishing marker. A few days later, when I was heading back north, I stopped for breakfast at a small diner near Wasilla. I struck up a conversation with a state trooper who came in, just making small talk about the storm. When I mentioned the night I'd seen someone near a misplaced mile marker, his expression changed. "Which one?" he asked. I told him it said 167, just past Nanana. He leaned back and rubbed his jaw. "You're not the first to see something out there." That caught my attention immediately. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, like he wasn't sure he should tell me. Then he said, "That section of road where you said you saw the guy, that used to be different. 10, 12 years ago, before the rework. There was a sharp bend near an old bridge. A man wrecked his pickup there one night during a blizzard. They found him frozen stiff the next morning, half buried in snow. Died a few feet from the marker. After the reconstruction, they moved that whole section straight. The old marker, 167, got taken out. There isn't supposed to be one there anymore." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The diner's heater rattled softly in the background, and outside, snow was beginning to fall again. "Sometimes," he added quietly, "drivers say they still see him. Usually in bad weather, always standing near where that sign used to be." I wanted to ask more, but my throat felt tight. I just nodded and finished my coffee in silence. That night, heading north again, I passed through the same stretch. I kept my eyes locked on the road, telling myself not to look for anything. But curiosity's a hard thing to fight. At some point, through the blur of falling snow, I thought I saw something. A faint silhouette on the shoulder, back turned, half lost in the storm. I blinked and it was gone. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even look at the CB when the static kicked in. But right before the signal cleared, I swear I heard that same calm voice whisper, almost too faint to catch. "You made it this time." Now, years later, every time November rolls around, I still take that same route. It's my job, after all, but I never forget that night. I've checked maps, records, even talked to other drivers. None of them can find any official record of a mile 167 anymore. Sometimes, when the snow gets heavy and the world goes white, I'll glance at the side of the highway and wonder if maybe, just maybe, that man is still standing out there, waiting for the next driver who doesn't know the road's changed. And every time my radio crackles with static, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine, because I know what it means. It means I'm getting close. The vanishing truck stop. I've been running long hauls through Alaska for the better part of 2 decades. And if there's one thing I've learned, It's that the cold up here isn't just weather, it's alive. It creeps under your clothes, into your bones, into your mind. It can make the most rational person start seeing things that aren't there. That's what I told myself about what happened on November 22nd, 2021, somewhere along the Richardson Highway, between Delta Junction and Paxson. But no matter how I try to explain it away, something about that night doesn't add up, not even now. It was late, just after 1:40 a.m., when the snow started coming down heavy enough to make my wipers useless. I'd been hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Tok to Anchorage. Normally, that route takes about 9 hours, but I was already running behind because of freezing fog north of Delta. My CB chatter had gone dead hours ago, and the GPS signal was spotty at best. I was exhausted, hungry, and dangerously close to white line fever. That hypnotic trance drivers get when the road and the snow start blending into one endless blur. My headlights bounced off swirling flakes like static on a screen. I remember the hum of the tires, the heater blowing lukewarm air, and the deep, rhythmic vibration of the diesel engine. All of it blending into a low, hypnotic drone. Around mile marker 212, I noticed my fuel gauge dipping lower than I liked. I hadn't passed a single open stop in over 100 miles, just a few abandoned stations half buried in snowdrifts. I started thinking I'd have to pull over and sleep in the cab until morning. Then, through the snow, I saw a light. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint orange glow in the distance. But as I crept closer, the beams of my headlights caught the outline of a sign. One of those old neon boards with a faded logo. Frosty's Truck Stop. Gas. Food Lodging. The letters flickered weakly in the snow. I'd never heard of Frosty's before, but at that moment I didn't care. I was freezing, hungry, and half delirious. I pulled in. The place looked ancient, like something out of the 1970s. A single gas pump under a crooked canopy. Paint peeling. The price per gallon frozen at $2.13. The building itself was small and squat, with windows half covered in frost and a flickering fluorescent light by the door. I remember thinking it was strange that there were no tire tracks in the snow except mine. No other vehicles. No footprints. I parked beside the building and climbed down from the cab, the wind slicing into me like knives. The air smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. I could hear the creak of the sign swinging on rusty chains above the roof. When I stepped inside, a bell jingled. One of those old brass doorbells. The first thing that hit me was the warmth. It shouldn't have been that warm. A wood stove crackled in the corner, and I could smell coffee, bacon grease, and cigarette smoke. The place looked old-fashioned, red vinyl booths, linoleum floors, and a long counter lined with stools. A radio hummed softly behind the register, playing some old country tune I didn't recognize. There was a woman behind the counter, maybe in her late 50s, wearing a faded apron that said Frosty's Diner. Her smile looked genuine but tired. "Rough night out there?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my hands together. Didn't think I'd see another open stop between Delta and Paxson. She gave a soft chuckle. "We don't get much business this time of year. Coffee?" I nodded gratefully and took a seat near the counter. The stool's vinyl cracked slightly under my weight. The warmth made me dizzy for a moment. A few minutes later, she set a mug in front of me. Steam curled up into the dim yellow light. I took a sip. Strong, bitter, but exactly what I needed. There were 3 other people in the diner. 2 men sat in a corner booth speaking quietly, and a heavy-set guy in a trucker's cap sat near the window staring out into the snow. The way they sat, still, expressionless, gave me a strange feeling. But maybe that was just exhaustion. I ordered eggs and toast, and the woman disappeared into the kitchen. While I waited, I pulled out my phone to check my GPS. Still no signal. Just a blank screen showing searching for network. I tried the CB2 and nothing but static. Then I realized something odd. The radio on the counter was playing Take It Easy by the Eagles. That's a song I've always liked. But when the chorus came, the lyrics were different, slower, wrong somehow, like the singer was mumbling words that didn't quite match. I turned slightly and noticed the guy near the window staring right at me now. His eyes were dark, unblinking. "You headed south?" he asked suddenly. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, Anchorage." He paused for a long time, still staring. Then in a low voice he said, "Road's bad ahead. Ice'll take you if you're not careful." Before I could respond, the waitress came back with my plate. The eggs looked perfect, steaming, golden. I thanked her and turned back to my food. When I looked toward the window again, the man was gone. I didn't hear him leave. The storm outside was howling now. Snow pounded against the windows hard enough to rattle them. The lights flickered once, twice, before steadying again. "You planning to stay the night?" the waitress asked. I shook my head. "Just need to refuel and get back on the road." She gave me a long look, then said quietly, "Sometimes it's safer to wait till morning." I smiled politely but didn't answer. Truth was, I didn't want to fall behind schedule. I paid for my meal, $8.50 exact change, and she wrote it on a paper receipt using a pen. No cash register, no card reader. When I stepped back outside, the snow had eased up slightly. I filled my tank, the pump surprisingly worked, and climbed back into the cab. As I started to pull out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Through the swirling snow, I saw the diner lights flicker again. The neon sign blinked off, then on, then off again, and stayed off. The entire truck stop went dark. I stopped for a moment, engine idling, staring through the mirror. The diner's windows reflected nothing but my own headlights. I thought maybe they'd lost power. Still, something about it unnerved me. I pressed on southward. About an hour later, I reached a familiar stretch of road, long, empty, curving between two frozen ridges. The storm had cleared enough that I could see the moon glowing faintly behind thin clouds. I glanced at my fuel gauge again, still nearly full. That's when I noticed something wrong with my receipt. It was gone. I always tuck my fuel and meal receipts into the visor above the dash. I reached up, expecting to feel the thin slip of paper, but it wasn't there. I checked the floor, the passenger seat, even my jacket pocket. Nothing. It bothered me more than it should have. A few miles later, I spotted the faint blue and red lights of a state trooper SUV parked on the shoulder. I slowed down and rolled my window halfway. The officer inside waved me to stop. I pulled over, thinking maybe there was an accident ahead. The officer, a younger guy, early 30s, and stepped up to my door. Snow crunched under his boots. "Evening, sir," he said. "You headed south?" "Yeah," I replied. "Just came from Frosty's truck stop a ways back." "Everything okay?" He frowned. "Frosty's?" "Yes," I said, confused. "About 40, maybe 50 miles north. Just filled up there." The trooper stared at me for a long moment. "Sir, there's no truck stop out here. Hasn't been for years." I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine. "What do you mean?" He cut me off gently. "If you're talking about the one that used to sit near mile 202, it burned down back in 2009. Gas leak, they said. Killed the owner and 3 customers. Nothing left but the foundation." My mouth went dry. "No, that can't be right." "It's there, lit up, open. I had coffee, eggs." The trooper shook his head slowly. "You sure you're feeling okay, sir? There's nothing but snow out there now." I must have looked rattled because he offered to radio for backup to check, but I told him not to bother. I just wanted to finish my route. He let me go, but his look lingered as I pulled away. Not suspicion exactly, but something like concern. By the time I reached Anchorage, dawn was breaking. The sky was pale pink over the mountains, and I was exhausted beyond reason. I parked at the depot and went straight to the office to hand in my trip. Logs. That's when I noticed something else. Something that made my stomach drop. The fuel log printed by my truck's onboard computer, which records every refueling event automatically, showed no entry for that stop. The last recorded fuel purchase was from Delta Junction, 190 miles earlier. My tank, however, was full. I checked the clock, the mileage, everything. Nothing made sense. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my laptop and searched for Frosty's Truck Stop Alaska. There it was, or rather what was left of it. Old newspaper clippings from 2009 confirmed exactly what the trooper said. The place had exploded during a gas leak one winter night. The article listed the names of the people who'd died, including a woman named Martha Lane, 58, the name on the apron of the waitress who'd poured my coffee. I haven't told many people about that night. A few fellow truckers on the circuit know the story, and most just laugh, say I was probably half asleep and dreaming. Maybe they're right. Maybe I hallucinated the whole thing. The warmth, the food, the woman's tired smile. But there's one thing I can't explain away. A few weeks later, while cleaning out my cab, I found something wedged under the passenger seat. A small folded piece of paper, Yellowed, burned slightly at the edges, it was a receipt. The handwriting was faded, but I could still make out the words, Frosty's Truck Stop. 1 coffee, 1 meal, $8.50, and underneath, scrawled in shaky pen ink. Next time, wait till morning. I keep that piece of paper in my wallet now. Every time I run that route and pass the empty field where the old truck stop once stood, I feel the same icy crawl up my neck, because when the wind blows just right, I can swear I hear the faint jingle of a brass doorbell and smell bacon and coffee in the cold, empty air. The woman on the frozen wrote it was November 2020, the kind of Alaskan winter night where everything feels suspended between life and death, quiet, frozen, and infinite. I was driving south from Fairbanks toward Talkeetna, hauling a shipment of insulated wire for a construction company. I remember the dashboard clock flashing 2:17 a.m. when I first saw her, the woman standing alone on the shoulder of a road that no sane person should have been walking at that hour. The temperature that night had plummeted to 25-degree highs. My windshield wipers were half frozen, scraping across glass that fogged no matter how high I turned the defroster. The truck's cab smelled faintly of coffee and diesel, and the only sounds were the rhythmic hum of the tires and the occasional groan of the wind pressing against the trailer. The stretch I was on, somewhere near mile 88 of the park's highway, was an endless ribbon of white and black. Snowbanks glowed dimly in my headlights, and the trees stood like dark spears in the distance. I hadn't passed another vehicle for almost an hour. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. Just me, the snow, and the low hum of static from the CB radio. Then suddenly my headlights caught movement up ahead, a shape stepping onto the road. My first thought was moose, but as I slowed, the outline became unmistakably human. A woman, thin, dressed in a long coat that looked too light for the weather, her dark hair whipping in the wind. I eased off the gas and flicked my high beams on. She turned her head toward me, shielding her face with one hand. The sight of her standing there in that desolate cold sent a jolt of unease through me. There were no houses for miles. No gas stations, no side roads. Just forest and ice. I rolled down the window a few inches and shouted over the wind, "Hey! You need help?" Her voice came faintly through the storm. "My car broke down." "Where?" I called back. She pointed behind her into the darkness. I leaned forward, squinting, but saw nothing. No headlights, no shapes, not even tire tracks in the snow. "Do you want to ride to the next stop?" I asked. She nodded slowly, hugging herself as if she were freezing to death. I climbed down from the cab, the cold biting instantly into my skin, and walked around to open the passenger side. My boots crunched on hard ice. When I reached her, she was trembling so badly I thought she might collapse. "Thank you," she whispered as I helped her up into the cab. Her voice was soft, barely audible, but something about it made me uneasy, too calm for someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. Once she was inside, I cranked the heat and offered her my spare blanket. She accepted it with a polite nod and wrapped it around her shoulders. For a while, we sat in silence except for the rumble of the engine and the muffled sound of snow hitting the windshield. After a minute or two, I asked, "Where's your car exactly? I didn't see any lights." "It's just off the road," she said, staring straight ahead. "It went into the ditch." "You should have stayed inside," I told her. "It's too cold out there to walk." "I tried," she murmured, "but it got too quiet." That sentence hung in the air. I frowned. "Too quiet?" She didn't answer. The longer we drove, the more unsettled I felt. She wasn't shivering anymore, but her skin still looked pale, almost bluish, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap like she was praying. Every few miles I'd glance over and she'd still be staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. After about 20 minutes, we approached a small roadside rest area, one of those old ones with a single dim light over a wooden sign and a trash bin half buried in snow. I figured it'd be a good spot to stop and let her call for help. "There's a payphone at this rest stop," I said. "You can call someone from here." She finally looked at me then, her eyes dark and glassy. "I can't. What do you mean?" She hesitated before whispering, "He's still out there." I felt my stomach tighten. "Who?" Her gaze drifted to the side mirror, to the road behind us swallowed by snow. "The man who stopped before you." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He said he'd help," she replied softly. "But when I went to get my things, He was gone. I walked for hours, but I could hear him behind me, following. I pulled into the rest stop and parked under the flickering light. The snow fell in thick, silent sheets, making everything beyond the halo of light disappear. "You're safe now," I said, forcing a reassuring tone. "There's no one here but us." She didn't move. Just stared at the windshield as if she could see something I couldn't. I glanced out across the snowfield, feeling that creeping instinct, the one that tells you you're being watched. The world outside looked dead, but the silence felt wrong. "Wait here," I said, grabbing my flashlight. I stepped out, my boots sinking into the snow. The wind had died completely. I walked around to check behind the truck, shining the light across the empty road. Nothing. No tracks except my own. When I got back in, she was gone. The passenger door was still locked from the inside. The blanket lay neatly folded on the seat. I froze, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, scanning the dark through the windshield. No answer. I leaned over and looked at the floor, half expecting she might have crouched down. Nothing. Just the faint smell of cold air and something else. Something faintly floral. Like old perfume, I grabbed my radio mic. "Breaker 19, anyone near mile 90 on the Parks Highway?" I said. "Picked up a woman on the road, she's..." Static. Then a burst of distorted noise like a whisper cutting through the frequency. "You shouldn't have stopped." I dropped the mic, adrenaline flooding my chest. The sound vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the same soft static. I tried convincing myself it was exhaustion. Maybe I'd imagined the voice. I turned the truck around to retrace the road, headlights slicing through the snow. For 20 miles I searched both shoulders. Nothing. No car in a ditch. No footprints, no sign of anyone walking. By dawn, I reached a service station near Trapper Creek. I went inside and told the attendant, a grizzled old guy who looked like he'd lived there his whole life, about what happened. He frowned. "What road did you say?" "Between mile 88 and 90, I said. "Picked her up just before the bend." The man's face changed. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" He sighed and poured himself a coffee. "You're not the first to see her. That stretch is where a woman died about 10 years ago. Slid off the road one winter, froze before anyone found her. They say she flags down drivers, but she never makes it to town." I stared at him, unsure what to say. "They found her car about a mile off the highway," he continued, "and her body 3 miles down. People swear she still walks that road asking for a ride home." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as local ghost lore, but the memory of her voice, her eyes, it was too vivid. Too real. Before I left, the attendant added one last thing. "If you picked her up, you might find something she left behind." I didn't understand what he meant until later that day, when I stopped in Wasilla to unload my shipment. As I was cleaning the cab, I noticed something lying on the passenger seat. A small silver pendant shaped like a snowflake. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up. It was ice cold, even inside the warm cab. I still have it, tucked away in my glove compartment. Some nights, when I drive that same route, the pendant rattles faintly against the dash, even when the road is smooth, even when there's no wind. And every time the snow starts falling and the headlights catch the road just right, I find myself glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see her again, standing there in the freezing dark, waiting for another ride that never quite makes it home. The last signal on Route 3 was November 19, 2021. The kind of Alaskan night where the air feels heavy enough to crush your lungs. I was hauling 40 feet of steel piping from Anchorage up toward Fairbanks, trying to beat an oncoming blizzard that had been sweeping down from the Brooks Range all day. The route was mostly empty this late in the season, and by the time I hit Route 3 around 1:40 a.m., I hadn't seen another vehicle in nearly an hour. Just the sound of my rig chewing through half-frozen slush, the occasional creak from the trailer, and the low hum of the heater that barely kept up with the cold. There's a kind of silence out there that only Alaska can give you. It's not just quiet, it's absolute. No insects, no distant hum of city noise, no animals bold enough to move through that kind of cold. Just black trees and white snow, all of it lit by your own headlights. I remember taking a sip of coffee, glancing down at my CB radio, and noticing the static had a strange rhythm. Not the usual hiss, but something that almost pulsed faintly. I turned the volume up. At first, it was just the normal background noise, but then somewhere underneath it came a faint click. Then another. Then through the static, a voice, male, quiet, distant. Breaker. Breaker 19. Any northbound come back. The hairs on my arms rose instantly. It wasn't unusual to hear other truckers on that route, but something about the tone stopped me. It didn't sound right. Like it was old, not just the equipment, but the cadence. The guy talked like he was from another decade. I grabbed my mic. Yeah, I copy. Northbound on 3, this is Hall 72, over. A long pause. Then faintly, You still out there? I frowned. Yeah, I'm here, bud. Where you at? You sound rough. Mile marker 134, the voice said. Jackknifed. Can't get her straight. You near? I checked my GPS. I was at 122, about 12 miles south of where he said. You got a name? I asked. Roger. Name's Roger Dale. Something clicked in the back of my head. That name sounded familiar. I couldn't place it right away, but I'd definitely heard it before. All right, Roger, I said. Sit tight. I'll be there in 15. He didn't respond for a while, then said quietly, Don't let him stand behind you. The CB hissed and went silent. I sat there for a few seconds, gripping the mic, listening to the static. Roger, come again? I asked, but there was no reply. I drove on anyway. It was pitch black except for the glow of my headlights cutting through falling snow. As I neared mile 134, visibility dropped to almost nothing. My wipers could barely keep up. Every so often I'd see shapes in the snow. Boulders, tree trunks maybe, but they'd vanish just as quick. The temperature gauge on my dash blinked. 31 degrees. Finally, my headlights caught something reflective. A trailer tilted sideways across the ditch, one headlight broken, the other flickering weakly. A jackknifed rig exactly where he'd said. I slowed, pulling off to the shoulder as best I could. Roger? I said into the CB. This is Hall 72, I'm here. No response. I grabbed my flashlight, wrapped my scarf tight, and stepped out into the kind of cold that steals your breath the second you exhale. The snow was deep, maybe 2 feet. My boots crunched as I walked toward the wreck. The truck's cab was half buried, the windshield coated in ice. The trailer looked old, older than it should have been, honestly, with faded paint and a logo I didn't recognize. I climbed up onto the step and shone my light through the window. The cab was empty. The driver's door was locked from the inside, but there were no footprints leading away. Just undisturbed snow, blank and pure, stretching out in every direction. My chest tightened. Roger? I called, loud enough for my voice to echo across the trees. Nothing. I was about to head back to my truck when I noticed something strange. The radio inside his cab was still on, faint static flickering through the speaker. I tried the handle again, harder this time, and the brittle lock gave way with a crack. Inside, the air was colder than outside, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. There was a thermos on the dash, frozen solid, and a leather logbook open on the seat. I picked it up and aimed my flashlight. The last entry read, November 14th, 1998, 1:30 a.m. Jackknifed near 134, waiting on tow. Snow too heavy. Below that, in shaky handwriting, if anyone hears me, don't stop. They stand behind you when you do. I felt something drop in my stomach. 1998. I took a step back, nearly slipping on the ice. The door creaked slightly behind me and I turned fast, nothing there. The wind howled faintly through the broken headlight. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, and climbed into my own cab. Breaker 19, I said into the mic, my voice trembling. Anyone copy? Got an abandoned rig near mile 134, looks like a 90s model. No driver, static. Then a burst of that same faint clicking. You found me. I froze. It was Roger's voice again. Roger, where the hell are you? I said. Your rig's empty. Been empty a long time, he said. The words slurred like wind over gravel. You saw it. The CB crackled violently, filling the cab with sharp bursts of static. I turned the volume down, but the noise only got louder. Sharper, like someone was breathing directly into the mic. Then, underneath the static, came another voice. Whispery. Close. He stopped too. I dropped the mic and threw the truck into gear, tires spinning as I tried to pull away. The snow was thick, but I managed to get traction. As I looked into the side mirror, I could have sworn I saw movement near the wreck. Dark figures, maybe 2 or 3, half lit by my taillights. They weren't walking. They were standing. Just standing there in the snow facing the road. By the time I reached mile 140, the signal was gone. The static faded back into normal silence. I didn't stop again until I hit a small diner outside Nenana, where I ran into another trucker named Pete, who'd been driving southbound that night. When I told him what happened, he gave me this strange look. "Roger Dale?" he asked. "Man, that guy's been dead for over 20 years. Jackknifed right around 134, froze before anyone found him." I laughed nervously. "You're kidding," he shook his head. "No joke. They say sometimes his old rig still shows up in the snow. Same spot, same call for help. My uncle swore he heard him on the CB once, years back." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe it was just an old transmission bouncing through the mountains, some weird atmospheric fluke. But when I went back out to my truck later that morning, something made my blood run cold. On my passenger seat sat the same logbook I'd found in Roger's cab. Open to the same page. I hadn't brought it with me. There was fresh writing under the last line now, neat dark ink that hadn't been there before. "You stopped. They know you now." I slammed the book shut and tossed it out into the snow. But every time I drive that route now, especially when the CB starts hissing with that same pulsing static, I keep one hand near the volume knob, because sometimes late at night just before the whiteout hits, I swear I still hear Roger's voice, faint, broken, whispering through the static. "Breaker 19, any northbound come back, and no matter how bad the weather gets, I don't answer anymore." The truck that followed me through the storm was November 14th, 2022, around 12:45 a.m., when the storm started in earnest. I was driving my 18-wheeler southbound on the Glen Highway, hauling refrigerated seafood from Anchorage to Wasilla. The snow was light at first, dusting the road in a thin, glittering layer, but within an hour it turned into a full-on whiteout. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The headlights barely cut through the haze, and the sound of the wind howling off the surrounding mountains was constant, like it was pressing against the metal of the truck. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, but that night felt different. The air smelled like ice and diesel, sharp and biting. My cab heater struggled to keep up, and the sound of my tires grinding over the slick road was almost hypnotic. Somewhere around mile 72, I caught a glimpse of headlights behind me, faint at first, barely visible through the snow. I assumed it was another truck, keeping distance, maybe slowing down to account for the weather. I didn't think much of it. Minutes passed. Then I noticed something off. The headlights weren't moving like a normal vehicle. No distance closing or widening. Just there behind me, perfectly following my every turn. Every curve I navigated, every gentle swerve around snowdrifts, it mirrored me exactly. My heart started to pound. I tapped my CB, hoping to hail the driver. "Breaker, breaker, you back there?" "This is Hall 19. Nothing. Just static." I tried again, louder. Still nothing. I checked my mirrors. The truck behind me, an older rig, rusted and massive with no visible license plate, stayed there, perfectly aligned with my lane, taillights glowing dimly through the blizzard. No lights ever flickered. No one inside seemed to move. I couldn't tell if it was empty. I shook my head. "Just nerves," I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The storm made everything feel unreal, but the way it followed me, it wasn't right. Around 1:15 a.m., the storm intensified. Snow hammered the windshield with a violent rhythm, and I had to slow to barely 40 mph. My visibility dropped to 20 feet. Every time I looked in the mirrors, the truck was there, a silent shadow behind me, almost impossibly steady. I tried to shake it. I took a turn-off at Eagle River Road, hoping to lose whoever was behind me. The snow was thick on the side road, barely plowed. I fought the wheel, trying to navigate the bends, praying the rig couldn't keep up. It did. Every turn I took, it mirrored me perfectly, appearing in the same spot behind me within seconds. I slammed on the horn. Nothing. The blizzard swallowed the sound almost immediately. The truck stayed there, silent, unyielding. Panic was starting to claw its way through me. I thought of stopping, pulling over, letting the driver pass. But something told me that wasn't a good idea. A primal instinct, deeper than reason, whispered, "Don't stop." Then I saw it. The faint reflection of someone in the cab. A figure, maybe male, shadowed and indistinct, staring straight ahead. Not blinking. Not moving, just watching. I didn't know whether to keep driving or try to confront it. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I tried the CB again. Breaker, breaker. Anyone back there? I see you, come back. Static, nothing. By 1:40 a.m. I was completely disoriented. The snow made the road a featureless ribbon of white. My headlights reflected off the frozen trees on the roadside, stretching long shadows that made the world feel unreal, but the truck stayed behind me, keeping pace as if it was glued to my rear tires. I thought about the radios we sometimes hear in storms, strange transmissions bouncing off ice, static carrying voices from decades ago. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was a hallucination caused by exhaustion in the blizzard. I tried to convince myself of that, but then I saw the taillights blink. Once, twice, in perfect synchronization with my own brake lights. My stomach dropped. That wasn't possible. I forced myself to focus on the road, remembering something an old driver told me once. Drive like your life depends on it. In Alaska, sometimes it does. I didn't know if it was fate or paranoia, but I floored it, trying to put distance between me and whatever this was. The rig behind me accelerated in perfect lockstep. The wind whistled louder, a screeching accompaniment to my mounting panic. My knuckles turned white. I didn't dare look over my shoulder for long, only glimpsing the shape occasionally. A dark, hulking silhouette, almost too large for a normal truck. By 2:05 a.m., I reached the familiar mile 83 marker, where the road straightens and visibility improves slightly. I dared to glance again. The truck was gone, completely vanished. No tracks, no snow disruption, nothing. Just the empty road stretching behind me, pure and silent except for the snow scraping under my tires. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the tree line for signs of the truck. There was nothing. I called dispatch on my cell, no service. My CB was dead again, just static. My heart didn't stop pounding for a long time. I kept driving, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination, some trick of the snow and the exhaustion. By the time I reached Wasilla, the sun was starting to lighten the sky. The storm had eased slightly, leaving a crystal layer of frost coating the highway. At the depot, other drivers were just starting their morning hauls. I told a few of them what happened, half expecting jokes. Instead, I got looks of unease. The kind you get when someone's experienced something similar. One guy older leaned in and said quietly, "Sounds like you ran into the midnight rig." "What?" I asked. He nodded toward the road. "Old legend around these parts. A truck that follows drivers in storms shows up out of nowhere. They say it's a driver who died years ago trying to make it through a blizzard. Some swear he shows up when the road's dangerous, just watching. Never catches up, never overtakes, just follows." I laughed nervously, but the memory of the taillights blinking in perfect sync with my brakes made my stomach turn. Later, as I cleaned out my cab, I noticed something odd. On the passenger seat, a small red reflector had appeared, the kind mounted on the back of trucks. I didn't bring it with me. It was scratched and old, like it belonged to a rig from decades ago. I put it in my glove compartment. Since that night, every November when I take that route, especially during blizzards, I swear I feel the vibration of tires behind me, faint against the snow-packed asphalt. I never look over my shoulder anymore. I don't answer CB calls, but sometimes in the dead of night when the storm is howling and the road is empty except for me, I hear faint static through the radio. And if I listen closely, I can hear a voice soft and raspy calling back, "Breaker, breaker 19. Any southbound, come back." I never reply because I don't want it to know I'm awake. The Fog That Swallowed Mile. 105 from 10 True Frozen Highway Horror Stories from November Hauls. It was November 25th, 2022, and I was driving my rig northbound on the Richardson Highway, hauling a refrigerated load of vegetables from Anchorage to Delta Junction. The night was bitterly cold, 28 degrees, with frost already forming on the windshield before the wipers could even keep up. My dashboard clock read 1:55 a.m., the dim light casting a pale green glow across the cab. I was alone, exhausted, and just past mile 100 when the first tendrils of fog started rolling in. At first it was thin, barely noticeable, a slight mist clinging to the ground. But by the time I hit mile 105, it had thickened into a wall that swallowed the road entirely. The headlights reflected off it, scattering into a ghostly white haze. I slowed, gripping the wheel tighter, my knuckles pale. The hum of my tires on the ice was deafening in the silence, the heater struggling to keep the cab even remotely warm. Normally, I drive this stretch without issue, but this fog was different. Heavy, suffocating, almost tactile, like it had weight. I could feel it pressing in through the windows, into my clothes, into my chest. As I drove, something moved in the mist. Faint at first, just a shadow flitting across the road. I swerved slightly, heart hammering, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Just fog stretching endlessly and the faint crunch of my tires on packed snow. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the headlights playing tricks, a trick of exhaustion and the way fog refracts light. Minutes passed. Then I noticed it, a set of taillights emerging out of the white nothing, dim, flickering. I blinked, but they didn't disappear. They seemed too close, too steady. My first thought was a truck stalled in the fog, maybe sliding off the ice. I grabbed the CB mic. Breaker 19, anyone up ahead? Hull 42, nothing, just static. I took a deep breath and continued slowly. The lights stayed exactly behind me. Every swerve I made, every brake I applied, the lights mirrored me perfectly, keeping a fixed distance. My pulse raced. My chest ached from fear and cold, and the hum of my own engine seemed deafening in the oppressive silence. I considered pulling over, but something about the fog told me it wasn't safe. There was no shoulder, only thick snow and the vague shapes of trees. The air felt wet against my face despite the heater, like condensation forming in the cab. Then I heard it, a soft, low thrum beneath the static, almost like a voice calling my name, distorted and far away. I froze, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, the tires, the way the fog muffles sound. But the sound persisted. Hull 42. Don't stop, I yelped, slamming the brakes, fishtailing slightly on the ice. The lights in the fog jerked, or maybe I imagined it. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, my forehead slick with sweat despite the bitter cold. I forced myself forward, inching past mile 106, when the lights suddenly disappeared. My heart didn't settle. The fog had gotten thicker, swirling around the cab like smoke. I could barely see the road a few feet in front of me. Then something moved inside the fog. Not lights, not reflections, and a figure. I swear I saw someone walking slowly, just off the edge of the highway, shrouded in white. I slammed my hands on the horn. Nothing. The figure didn't acknowledge me, didn't change pace. It just watched and then vanished. I started shaking, panic rising. My CB crackled again, just static at first, then the same distorted, low voice. Hull 42. Don't look behind you. I gritted my teeth, keeping my eyes forward. I floored it, tires spinning slightly on the ice, praying for the fog to thin. My headlights barely pierced the wall of white. My skin felt numb, my fingers stiff despite my gloves. I could hear my own heartbeat over the hum of the engine. Somewhere around mile 108, visibility improved slightly. The fog thinned, revealing the empty, snow-covered highway. No lights, no figure, nothing but the road stretching ahead. I exhaled, shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. My chest ached from adrenaline and panic. I tried the CB one more time. Breaker 19, anyone? For a moment, silence. Then a low, distorted response, almost as if the radio itself was breathing. You shouldn't have stopped. They'll follow. I yelped and slammed the truck into gear, gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. The rest of the route to Delta Junction passed in a blur. The snow eased, and by the time I reached mile 120, the road was clear and the fog gone. I parked at the first open rest area, hands trembling. Shaking so badly I couldn't hold my coffee cup without spilling it. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that the fog, the stress, the blizzard, and the monotony of the highway had tricked my mind. But later that morning I looked at the GPS log on my dash and froze. It showed my truck stopping, for exactly 7 minutes, at mile 105. I had no memory of stopping. I'd driven that stretch straight through. No tire marks indicated a pullover. No snow disruption, nothing. I told a couple of other truckers about the incident. Most laughed, but one, older, who had been running the same route for decades, grew quiet and said, "That stretch, that fog, it's not natural. Some drivers swear they've lost time there. Seen things moving in the mist, heard voices calling from nowhere. It's been happening for years and nobody can explain it." I didn't sleep much the rest of that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the fog rolling across the highway, the shadowy figure on the roadside, the taillights perfectly following me. Even weeks later, when I take that highway, I sometimes see faint wisps of fog curling along the trees like smoke, moving against the wind. And I remember the voice in the static. I don't answer CB calls anymore on that route. I don't stop. I don't look back. Because when the fog swallows the road and the voice comes through the radio, you realize no matter how fast you drive, some things will always follow you. And if you stop, they'll catch you. The Cabin That Shouldn't Exist, from 10 True Frozen Highway Horror Stories from November Hauls. It was November 17th, 2022, and I was hauling a refrigerated shipment of frozen seafood from Anchorage to Fairbanks. The night was bitter, around 29 degrees, and the wind was whipping across the Parks Highway with a ferocity that made the cab shudder with each gust. I was alone just past mile 76 when the storm started creeping in. Soft at first, then thick snowflakes slamming against the windshield, reducing visibility to barely 20 feet. I had been on the road for hours, exhaustion creeping in, and I was counting down the miles to the next rest stop. Around 1:30 a.m., I noticed a faint glow through the swirling snow, a dim light ahead off to the right side of the highway. My first thought was a road maintenance shack or maybe a cabin someone lived in. Nothing seemed out of place except I had driven this highway countless times and I had never seen anything there. No structures, no lights, nothing. My GPS showed only forest for miles. Curious and maybe a little reckless, I pulled over onto the shoulder, crunching through the snow to get a better look. As I approached, I realized it was definitely a cabin, small wooden, smoke curling lazily from a crooked chimney. The door was closed, but light spilled through frost-covered windows. The smell of wood smoke reached me faintly, warm and familiar against the cold that was seeping into my boots. I shook my head. "That's not possible," I muttered aloud. I scanned the tree line. Nothing else around, just endless forest blanketed in snow. No path, no road, no way in or out except the highway I had just driven. For a moment I thought about just driving on, but something about the soft glow and the smoke made me hesitate. Maybe someone was stranded in the storm. Maybe they needed help. I stepped closer to the cabin, the crunch of snow underfoot the only sound apart from the distant roar of the highway behind me. I knocked on the door. "No response. Hello," I called. My voice sounded strange in the cold air, thin and brittle. Still nothing. I tried the handle, locked. But then slowly the door creaked open on its own. My heart jumped. Inside, the cabin was warm, dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with old tools, shelves covered in jars of preserved food, and a small stove sputtered softly in the corner. The place looked lived in but untouched. No footprints in the snow leading to it, no tracks inside the doorway. I stepped in cautiously, breath forming clouds in the warm air. The warmth was comforting but also felt unnatural, too clean, too perfect, like it had been waiting. "Hello?" I asked again. The only reply was the soft creak of the floorboards beneath me. I walked toward the stove, hoping to find someone, anyone, inside. As I passed a table, I noticed a notebook lying open. The writing was neat, careful. One line read, "They come when you think you're alone. Don't let them see you." A shiver ran through me. The handwriting was old-fashioned, the ink slightly faded, but the words felt urgent, alive. I turned toward the window and froze. Outside, through the frost, I could see nothing. No snow, no trees, no road. Just a blank gray void. I blinked. My eyes stung from the cold and the exhaustion. I stepped closer. The highway should have been visible behind me. A line of lights, maybe a truck passing. Nothing. A sound came then, soft, almost imperceptible, like the scraping of boots in snow. I spun toward the door. It was closed. I hadn't heard it close. My chest hammered, my hands cold and shaking despite the warmth. I whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. I grabbed my flashlight from the truck and aimed it at the door. The light seemed to stretch the shadows into impossible angles. And then I noticed something else, the walls of the cabin. They weren't quite square. The angles were slightly off, as if the room itself was warped. I backed toward the door, trying to convince myself to leave. As I reached for the handle, a soft voice, female, almost a whisper, said from the corner of the room, "You shouldn't be here." I spun. Nothing. The corner was empty, shadows stretching unnaturally toward the ceiling. My mind raced, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stumbled back, fumbling with the door handle, finally wrenching it open. I ran into the snow outside. The cold hit me instantly, biting through my jacket and gloves. I turned toward the highway. It was gone. Completely gone. Only trees stretched endlessly in every direction, snow thick and unbroken. No trace of the cab, no tire tracks, nothing. I stumbled through the snow, disoriented, trying to retrace my route. My flashlight caught something in the distance, the faint glow of the cabin. I froze. It hadn't been there before, not on the highway. Not anywhere. But there it was, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, light spilling through frosted windows. I ran toward it, terrified and compelled at the same time. As I got closer, I noticed the door open again, just a sliver. Inside, I could see the table, the notebook, and written across the page a single line in fresh ink, "Welcome back." "We've been waiting." I stumbled back into the snow, my breath ragged, my legs shaking. The glow flickered once, then vanished entirely. When I finally reached the highway, a solid strip of ice and asphalt exactly where it should have been, the cabin was gone. No tracks, no smoke, no light. I got back in my truck, hands shaking, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination, the exhaustion, the storm, the isolation. But the notebook, I still have it, tucked in my glove compartment, open to that same line. The ink is still fresh despite the cold, despite the fact I haven't returned to that place. Since that night, whenever I drive late on the Parks Highway, especially in November when the wind howls through the trees, I swear I see it, faint glow between the pines, smoke curling toward the sky just at the edge of visibility. And sometimes, I hear soft whispers telling me I'm not alone. I never stop anymore. I don't answer the call to investigate, because the cabin waits, and it always will. The highway that repeated from 10 true frozen highway horror stories from November hauls. It was November 21st, 2022, and I was hauling frozen seafood from Anchorage up north to Fairbanks. I had been on the Glen Highway for hours, the night bitter and silent, with temperatures hovering around 30 degrees. My rig's headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the endless stretch of snow and ice, but the edges of the road blurred into black forest. The only sounds were the tires grinding against packed snow, the low rumble of the engine, and the occasional whistle of the wind pressing against the cab. My dashboard clock read 2:03 a.m. when I noticed something strange. A faint glimmer ahead, far enough that I almost dismissed it as ice reflecting my own lights. As I approached, I realized it wasn't ice. It was the turnoff sign for the highway, the same one I'd passed 10 miles ago. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and checked the GPS. The screen said I was at mile 89, exactly where I should be. I shook my head, convinced I had misread the odometer or lost track of the road. Snowstorms can do strange things to perception, but then a mile down the road I saw it again. The same bend, the same patch of frozen road, the same turnoff sign. My stomach sank. It was repeated, like I hadn't moved at all. I tried accelerating, gripping the wheel tighter, but the landscape kept folding back on itself. Every landmark I passed, a jagged tree, a snow-covered rock, a faded mile marker, appeared again, exactly the same, as if I were trapped in a loop. I tried to remain calm. Exhaustion, hypothermia, and stress can play tricks on the mind. I grabbed my CB mic. "Breaker 19, anyone out there? This is Hall 55, anyone copy?" Static. I repeated my call louder, hoping another driver would respond. Nothing. Not even another truck. The highway was completely silent. The kind of silence that makes your blood feel thick in your veins. I glanced at my mirrors. The trees on the shoulders seemed to shift slightly, but each time I looked back, they were exactly where they had been, frozen in place. Around 2:25 a.m., I noticed headlights behind me. Another truck, red and rusted, keeping a consistent distance. I exhaled slowly, relieved to see another human presence, thinking maybe this driver could break the loop. I flashed my high beams and honked. The other rig mirrored my movements exactly. Every swerve I made, every brake I tapped, it did the same, like a shadow glued to my rear. Panic started rising. My pulse thumped in my chest, my hands trembling on the wheel. I tried overtaking it, swinging wide to the left lane, but the moment I did, the road in front of me snapped back. Mile markers, trees, the same bend I had passed 10 minutes ago, and all repeating. It was like driving through a mirrored version of the highway, a twisted loop where time and space had no meaning. I called dispatch on the cell. No signal. My CB was dead again, static only. My rig's GPS screen flickered, showing me in one place, mile 89, even though I had been driving for 20 minutes. Then I saw movement in the fog along the roadside, pale shapes, like people standing motionless in the snow. I blinked. They didn't move, but they seemed to be watching just beyond the reach of my headlights. I shivered despite the heater cranking at full, my breath forming clouds inside the cab. My knuckles were white. Around 2:40 a.m., the other truck behind me disappeared. No lights, no tracks in the snow. Just vanished. My heart raced. I accelerated, hoping to escape the loop, but the road repeated again. Mile 89, the same bend, same patch of ice, same turnoff sign. I slammed my hands on the wheel. I started shouting, talking to myself. It's not real. It's the snow. It's exhaustion. It has to be. But the voice that answered wasn't mine. It was faint, whispering through the static of the CB. You shouldn't have stopped. You shouldn't have looked back. I froze. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, moving against the snow, dark and featureless. I slammed the CB down, gripping the wheel, and tried to drive straight, ignoring the repeated landscape. Around 2:55 a.m., the loop broke. Mile markers finally started progressing. Snowbanks shifted. The trees no longer mirrored themselves. I exhaled, shaking, unable to stop staring at the road ahead. But even as relief started to creep in, I noticed something chilling in my mirrors. The shadow was still there, following. Not a truck, just a dark, looming figure, half-shape, impossible to define, moving across the snow in perfect tandem with me. I floored the rig, tires spinning, heart pounding. The shadow matched every move, never falling behind, never disappearing. My breath came fast, ragged, and sweat mixed with the bitter cold inside the cab. I didn't dare look away. I didn't dare blink. By 3:15 a.m., I reached a small rest stop, the first sign of civilization for miles. I pulled in hard, brakes screaming on ice, and threw the truck into park. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving a crisp, silent landscape. I jumped down, scanning the tree line. Nothing. The shadow didn't follow me into the light. I ran inside the rest stop, shaking, hands freezing despite the heater inside. Other drivers looked up, concerned. I tried explaining, but no one could grasp what I had seen. They gave me the usual half-laughs, half-pitying glances. Later, when I returned to my truck, I noticed something etched into the frost on my driver's side window. A handprint. Large, pale, almost translucent, pressed from the outside. I hadn't seen anyone touch the truck. The snow outside was undisturbed. Since that night, I avoid mile 89 on the Glen Highway after dark. Even during the day, I feel a chill when I drive past it, a sense that the highway itself isn't right. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at rest stops, I can see it. The loop, the repeated mile markers, the shadow following me, and that faint whisper. You shouldn't have stopped. You shouldn't have looked back. And I know, deep down, if I ever return to that stretch at night, the highway will repeat itself again. The Lights That Didn't Move, from 10 True Frozen Highway Horror Stories from November Hauls. It was November 12, 2022, and I was hauling a refrigerated shipment of seafood from Anchorage to Fairbanks. The night was particularly bitter, around 32 degrees with gusts of wind that rattled the cab and made the rig shudder. I had just passed mile 63 on the Parks Highway, a stretch of road I knew well, when the first snowflakes of a light storm began drifting in. Visibility was decent at first, but the wind made the headlights' glow feel weak, diffused, almost ethereal. Around 12:50 a.m., I noticed something unusual, a pair of faint lights off to the right, sitting just on the edge of the forest. At first, I thought it was a small cabin, maybe a maintenance shed. But there was no path leading to it, just endless snow-covered trees. Odd, but I didn't think much of it. Minutes later, the lights were still there. Not shifting, not dimming, not moving with the wind. They weren't twinkling like distant lamps, not reflecting off ice or snow. They were static, fixed in the same spot. My chest tightened. I have driven this highway countless times and I knew there were no structures in that area. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield. The lights didn't move. They didn't flicker. They didn't react to me at all. I tapped the CB. Breaker 19, anyone up ahead? Hall 88. Nothing. I continued, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the storm. The snow was now heavier, sticking to the windshield in clumps despite the wipers, but the lights remained, unwavering, almost taunting. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands tightening on the steering wheel, sweat mixing with frost along my hairline. By 1:15 a.m., I reached a point where the road curved sharply, descending a small hill. The lights were still there, perfectly aligned, exactly where I had first seen them. I slowed further, my breath ragged inside the cab. I didn't want to pass them, but I had no choice. As I crested the hill, I realized the worst. The lights were moving along with me. I froze, pressing a hand to my chest. I had slowed to barely 20 mph. The lights maintained pace, no acceleration, no change in direction, just following. I grabbed my CB again. Breaker 19, come in. Anyone behind me? Static. Nothing else. A gust of wind rattled the cab and the heater sputtered, momentarily cutting out, leaving the inside bitterly cold. My hands shook. I reached for the radio again. The static changed, sharp, high-pitched, almost like a whisper. Then I heard it. A faint, raspy voice, distorted. You see us, but we see you too. I yelped, throwing the CB aside. My rig fishtailed slightly on the ice. My heart pounded, my vision blurred from adrenaline and cold. I forced myself forward, gripping the wheel as tightly as I could. The light stayed, constant, unblinking. Not a reflection, not a truck, not a cabin. Nothing I recognized. Just lights, two dim, pale dots hovering near the tree line, perfectly synchronized with my movement. By 1:35 a.m., the storm intensified. Snow slammed the windshield, visibility dropped to 10 feet, and the lights now appeared slightly closer, almost on the edge of the road. My pulse raced. I considered stopping, but something primal warned me not to. Something inside said, if you stop, they will reach you. I pressed on, navigating the slippery highway, heart hammering in my chest. The lights matched my every move, weaving, swerving, braking, like a shadow bound to me. I couldn't see a person, a rig, or any recognizable shape. Only the lights, constant, watching, waiting. Around 1:50 a.m., I reached mile 68, a stretch where the highway straightens and passes a frozen creek. I glanced at the mirrors, hoping the lights were gone. They weren't. Now, faint shapes appeared. With them, darker, vaguely human, just at the edge of the headlights' reach. Figures standing, unmoving, silent, their eyes glowing faintly like the lights themselves. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, heart hammering, yelling to myself to keep driving. My cab rattled, tires skidding on packed ice, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. By 2:05 a.m., I reached a turnoff where I could leave the highway and head toward a plowed side road. I veered sharply, bracing for impact. The light stayed, following for a few seconds, then abruptly vanished. Silence fell like a stone. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the wheel. I sat there frozen, chest heaving. The only sound was the wind and the slow hum of my engine. I didn't stop until I reached a rest area 10 miles later. Other truckers were there, sleeping or quietly drinking coffee. I tried to explain what I saw, the static lights, the figures, the way they followed, but they gave me concerned looks and shook their heads. No one had ever reported seeing anything like that, they said. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the lights hovering at the tree line, the pale figures, the way they mirrored my every move. My pulse still races thinking about it. Weeks later, I checked satellite images of the area. Nothing. No structures, no lights, no indication of previous human activity. Just forest, snow, and the frozen highway stretching endlessly. I've never gone back to that stretch at night. But sometimes driving in other parts of Alaska, I see faint lights flickering just beyond the trees, in places where there's nothing at all. And sometimes, late at night, my CB crackles softly, just enough to hear the same distorted whisper. You see us. But we see you too, and I know deep down that if I ever drive that stretch again after dark, they will be there, waiting, unblinking, following. The Vanishing Rest Stop from 10 True Frozen Highway Horror Stories from November Halls. It was November 19th, 2022, just after midnight around 12:37 a.m., when I was driving my rig northbound on the Richardson Highway, hauling frozen seafood from Anchorage to Delta Junction. The night was bitter, temperatures hovering around 31 whatever, and a light snow dusted the landscape, covering trees and roadside signs with a white sheen. I had been on the road for nearly 6 hours, and fatigue was starting to weigh on me. The cab heater was struggling, and the glow from the dashboard was the only thing breaking up the oppressive darkness outside. Somewhere past mile 98, I began looking for the next rest stop. My usual route has a handful of them, spaced well for truckers on long hauls. Normally, I wouldn't have worried. I knew exactly where the stops were. But that night, everything felt off. The wind was sharper than usual, rattling the rig, and the snow made the road look almost uniform, like a featureless white ribbon stretching ahead. My eyes scanned the distance for the familiar glow of lights and the outline of buildings, but nothing appeared. I reached mile 102. Still nothing. Not a hint of a rest area, not even the faint reflection of lights on the snow. I checked my GPS. It showed the rest stop just a few miles ahead, a small icon marking its presence. But when I glanced at the road, there was no sign. No plowed parking lot, no light spilling into the darkness, nothing but the ice-slicked highway and dense forest. I slowed the truck, tension rising, heartbeat hammering in my ears. The cold wind pressed against the cab, making my breath fog the windows. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. Maybe the snow had covered the rest stop, maybe the lights were obscured, but something didn't feel right. By 12:55 a.m., the highway began to stretch endlessly. I reached mile 104, and still, there was no rest stop in sight. I called dispatch, voice trembling slightly. Breaker 19, this is Hall 63. Anyone know if the mile 102 stop is open? Static, nothing. I checked my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. Not another vehicle, not a single light. It was silent in a way that pressed against the skull. A vacuum that seemed to swallow sound. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, fingers stiff and frozen. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but fear made my stomach churn. Then I saw the glow. Faint, warm, orange, flickering through the trees on the right side of the highway. Relief surged through me. Finally, a rest stop. I veered off, tires crunching on packed snow, heading toward the light. The cab heater's struggle felt less urgent now, and I exhaled a shaky breath. As I approached, the outline became clearer. A small building, lanterns burning faintly on either side of a door, and a parking lot just barely plowed. I could see a few trucks parked, long shadows stretching across the snow and smoke curling lazily from a chimney. I slowed, eager to park, stretch my legs, and grab some coffee. I stopped, cutting the engine, and stepped outside. The air hit me like a wall, bitter, sharp ice biting through my gloves. My boots crunched in the snow as I walked toward the building. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The rest stop was pristine, clean, almost too perfect for November, Alaska. I went inside. The small lobby smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. A woman behind the counter looked up and smiled warmly. "Evening," she said. Her voice was soft, comforting. "You're lucky to make it tonight. The highway's been rough." I tried to respond, but something felt wrong. The room felt empty, too quiet, almost frozen in time. I noticed the wall clock. It read 11:17 p.m. I frowned. My truck dashboard had been showing 1:57 a.m., a discrepancy of more than an hour and a half, but the woman didn't seem to notice. I stepped back outside, needing to clear my head. That's when I realized something truly horrifying. The trucks in the parking lot weren't moving. Not a single vehicle. Dusting of snow on the hoods. Some older rigs, rusted, long abandoned. Ones I had seen in photos of decommissioned highways. The lot wasn't active. No coffee cup on the counter. No footprints outside except my own. The building, the light, the smoke on it was all a mirage. Panic hit. I ran back to my truck. The warmth of the cab felt temporary, almost fragile. I started the engine, eyes darting around, trying to reassure myself. The GPS now showed the rest stop ahead, still a few miles down the highway. I blinked. I was parked right where the GPS had marked it. I floored the rig, heart hammering, and raced down the highway. Mile 106, mile 107, no rest stop. No building, no lights, nothing but the endless snow-covered highway and dense forest. I slammed on the brakes, turning around, hoping it had been a hallucination. But the highway stretched endlessly, uniform, featureless, the rest stop completely vanished. No sign it had ever been there. I tried calling dispatch again, static. I tried the CB, static. My pulse felt like it would explode, breath ragged. The road ahead stretched into darkness. I drove slowly, scanning the tree line, hoping for something, any sign of civilization. But the only thing I saw was snow, trees, and shadows stretching unnaturally along the road. By 2:25 a.m., I was shaking uncontrollably, hands white from gripping the wheel. I thought about turning around, retracing my path, but the highway felt different. Each mile marker passed didn't make sense. They were slightly off, mismatched, as if the road had shifted while I wasn't looking. I kept driving until sunrise, just trying to reach Delta Junction. The rest stop never appeared again. I asked other drivers about it over the following weeks. None had ever heard of a stop at that location. Some gave uneasy smiles, saying the highways in November can play tricks on the mind. Others shrugged. But I remember the warmth inside the building, the soft voice of the woman behind the counter, the smoke curling from the chimney, and the trucks that weren't real. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving alone on that stretch of highway, I swear I see a faint orange glow through the trees, just at the edge of vision, flickering like a lantern. I never stop anymore, not at mile 102, not anywhere isolated, because I've learned something about these roads in November. Sometimes what looks like refuge is just another trap, another trick of the frozen night. And if you step inside, it might never let you leave.